Hello driving intelligence community. Welcome to part 2 of the series I'm doing on the 97 through 99 Deville. This particular video is going to be about repairs to the coolant system. In this video I'll replace the radiator and the coolant tank, but it starts off with some investigation as to why this vehicle was losing coolant in the first time. Very slow leak, and as I mentioned in the first video, these cars are notorious for overheating, at least the Northstar engine is. And it's important to make sure that the cooling system is completely up to design specs to make sure that the engine stays at its proper operating temperature. We've got coolant leak somewhere around this coolant reservoir. First thing I want to look at is this hose, which looks like it's in terrible condition. We'll take the clamps off, pull the hose, and check for any leaks, because it could definitely be leaking right down from the coolant hose. Turns out the coolant overflow tank is cracked. If I zoom in here, you can see that very small crack. Gonna have to probably find a replacement reservoir tank for this Deville. What I'm going to do in the meantime, I've sanded this down because I'm going to use a 2-part epoxy to temporarily make sure this is sealed, we don't get any coolant leak. First thing I did was spray it down with some brake cleaner to get the grease off. I've used some sandpaper to clean up the surface to make sure that there's a good bond for the epoxy. So the epoxy's been added on generously. I don't care about the looks of this. And we'll let this set overnight and then reattach the hose. Even though I epoxied this, it's leaking again. Very slight leak under here. Starting to narrow down the leak. The antifreeze looks like it's coming from somewhere in this area, but then I saw fluid coming down these battery wires. The fluid is actually going through the battery wrapping, the wire wrapping, and dripping out here. So you can see how the fluid can leak in one location but actually come out in another. But as I further investigated, here you'll see another leak. It looks like the end tank is leaking on this radiator. Found the leak and it's pretty bad now. It is the end tank. My supervisor is sunbathing today. Anyway, I had already started on this project. I took the cover off of this, and what I'm going to have to do to get to this radiator is probably remove one of these engine straps. I won't need to remove both, I hope. Just to give me some clearance, I got to take out the upper radiator hose, which I will replace anyway. The engine cooling fan is going to have to come out. The drain for the radiator is on the left side, driver's side of the vehicle. You're going to have to pull this panel down slightly, just a couple of push pins, and right here is your drain. And now for the bourbon bolt of the day. That one bolt that the automotive engineers wanted to make sure was as difficult as possible to drive you to the bar after you finished your maintenance activity. So there's a drain valve up behind this, and you'll have to open that up and let it drain into a bucket. I had to pull quite a few parts off to get this radiator out. I'm still working on it. There's one little trick that Cadillac did to make sure this thing wouldn't come out easily. You'll see I had to pull both electric fans, the air cleaner assembly, the top bracket that holds the radiator in place had to come out. That comes out easily with 3 bolts. And now, another bourbon bolt on the same repair activity. These engineers surely want to drive us to the bottle. Cheers. I'm going to call this my bourbon screw because I'm going to have a big one after I'm finished here today. That is the hardest part of this entire project. The hard part is, let's see if we can show this in the video. Right here, there's a little bolt that holds the condenser lines going past the radiator, keeps them stable. And there's not a whole lot of room to get to this. So I'm cramping up my hands with a 7mm Craftsman wrench, a very small one, to get in there and remove that. As I mentioned in the intro, I decided to replace the alternator. This is the original alternator on this vehicle, 150,000 miles, 31 years old, and just as soon as I button everything back up and get rid of all this clearance I've now got for that alternator, I'm going to have to do it again when that alternator fails. It's just inevitable. That's Murphy's Law for you. You can see that the rubber material is ballooning. I just decided to go ahead and replace this thermostat with the owner's approval without taking a look at this. We just went ahead and bought one, and it's one of those, as I mentioned, it's a fail to open, and it's a good thing we decided to do this, because this thermostat is going bad. I'm trying to see if there's some difference between the original thermostat that came out of the car. Again, you can see where this rubber material, gasket material, whatever this is degrading, to the fail-safe, where even if the thermostat fails, your car will not overheat. Now I'll install the thermostat, but one thing I noticed, and you should be very cautious of, you see this gasket. The old thermostat came out and it did not have the gasket on there. I haven't checked this yet, but I have a feeling that the gasket is still stuck in here. There it is. You do not want to install it with double gasket, so make sure you take the gasket material out if it did not come out with the thermostat. Both the fans are in. Got the hoses on, brand new hoses. Wanted to make sure that they were robust, because you don't want to get back in there. Actually, to get the bottom end of this hose, it's easier with this fan removed. New thermostat is in. Everything is done on the top except for the top radiator hose. Battery's been removed. You can see it gives a lot of access. We have one bolt here for the coolant overflow, one bolt here. There was a strap that's been removed with a bolt that goes around the air conditioning accumulator. I'll have to remove this hose. The level indicator is down here, electrical connection I can take out when I pull it out. And this should just rotate and pull straight out. I forgot to mention there is one other nipple with a hose on it that needs to be disconnected at the bottom of this before you can pull this out. It looks like this was also cracked. It was leaking slightly. I just went ahead and broke it off. But to get this off, you're going to need one of these clamp tools. If you still have the original clamp on your vehicle, these clamps will give you remote access to pull that clamp off and slide it off the nipple. Otherwise, it would be extremely difficult to get that out. The idler and tensioner pulleys have been put back in, as well as the serpentine belt. So I decided to go ahead and put the coolant reservoir back in. This is a brand new one. As I had mentioned previously, this was cracked and allowing fluid to escape. The new one, which I've gotten from Amazon, works perfectly. Takes a little bit of finagling to get it in there, but once it's in, 3 bolts and an electrical connection. Actually, it's 2 bolts, but there's 1 bolt that's strapped to the accumulator. Now I'm going to flush the engine one last time. I've been running the cleaner through this engine for quite some time. I've already drained the radiator, as you can see down here. Not sponsoring AutoZone, but I'm going to take this torque strap out, disconnect this top return hose to the radiator, hold it up, and introduce water into the system to keep the water circulating through the engine and cleaning out all the debris. The method I've used to flush this is to take the old hose, cut it into a piece that I can clamp to the front of the engine, run water, fresh water through the top of the radiator to completely flush out the engine. I've also got the heater on full heat and full fan. Continuing the flushing operation, one thing I've noticed, you see that tube, the water's flowing out. This engine is supposed to be notorious for plugging that cooling tube that comes from the area underneath the throttle body. Obviously on this Deville you can see it's flowing perfectly, so no problem there. As you just saw in the video, I made sure that the return line that goes to the coolant reservoir was not plugged. A typical issue with some of these cars where that return line does plug up, and that could cause overheating issues. So if it is plugged, you'll need to remove it and make sure it's cleaned out. I continue to flush the engine, running clear water, clean water into the entire cooling system until I saw clear, clean water coming out. At that point, I buttoned up the system and then added 50/50 Dex Cool until the system was full. I believe it takes about 12.5, 13.5 quarts. You can burp the system by squeezing the upper hose to make sure that you're getting coolant throughout the entire system. Just be cautious, it gets very hot, it's close to the exhaust manifold, and of course you don't want your fingers near those cooling fans when they're operating. But continue to make sure that all the air is purged out, drive it briefly, make sure you don't have any overheating problems, and then after the engine cools back down, then top it off with 50/50 Dex Cool. I hope this helped you out. If you have any questions about this operation, let me know, and look forward to part 3 coming up soon, 97 through 99 Deville.